Have you ever read a banned book? Hi friends and readers, this week, another week means another reading vlog. Every week I try to read about 2 books, and there was one book on my TBR that after I did a little bit more research, I realized is actually on a list of popularly banned or challenged books in America. So I wanted to challenge myself this week to stay curious, ask questions about why books get banned, where books are banned, and read one of those banned books. And so instead of reading just one, I went through a list of those popularly challenged in America and decided to pick out a second one that we would be reading. So we're gonna read 2 banned books this week. And funnily enough, both of these banned books have been adapted for television. The first banned book was turned into a TV series, and the second book was turned into a movie. So there's a good chance you've heard of these 2 books, whether by the book because they were banned, whether or not you just heard of the book, or maybe even the TV series and the movie. For me, the premise of this week is to 1, challenge myself to read books that I might not always read based off of what's popular and what you see on the internet, and to 2, just stay curious to discover dialogue, conversations, and questions that come up with books, especially books that are challenged. And this is less of me commenting on the broader political conversation that might come from banning a book or having books banned, and more so an individual endeavor of mine. I don't think that I have read a banned book in my adult life. I think most of the books on the list that you see banned, I was going through them. The only ones I recognized having read were books that I read back in high school as a part of curriculum. So maybe since then they have been banned. Not quite sure. I'd have to do a little bit more research on that as well. So let's hop into a very curious reading week by starting with The Handmaid's Tale. Here for our first update on reading banned books this week, and I have my phone because lots of notes for a video like this and for a book like what we are starting out with. I have started The Handmaid's Tale on my Kindle. This book is by Margaret Atwood. I think I said in an earlier clip, you probably recognize The Handmaid's Tale either for the book, the cover of the book, or the TV series. It looks like the book was originally released by Margaret Atwood back in 1985, and since then there have been some updated versions. Like when I click about this book on my Kindle, it says from 2019, so I believe it's just an updated version of it. And since then it's been turned into a movie, it looks like maybe in 1990, and then the Hulu original series called The Handmaid's Tale came out in 2017. Now for the TV show, I did watch a few seasons of this with a friend of mine back in college, so that would have been back in 2022, which was about 4 years ago now, so it has been some time since I watched it. I know I didn't end up finishing the series. It's definitely something I would want to go back to, but it felt a little too close to home to return to right now, so I had put it off, but I decided it was finally time to read the book. And this was the book that was on my TBR that prompted this week's idea. However, even though that was a few years back, I can still picture who our main characters look like, what the actresses look like, and I'm imagining them now as I read through the book. And a quick little sidebar about what I do remember from the TV series, it's pairing hand in hand with the few chapters that I'm into in the book already, so I'm definitely able to imagine what it looks like. One thing I never got used to was seeing the actress Alexis Bledel in The Handmaid's Tale. If you know who Alexis Bledel is, they are Rory in Gilmore Girls, and then wow, their character in The Handmaid's Tale, I was just never able to imagine that actress acting in a role like that. That was totally side note. This book is also on Kindle Unlimited, so you can read it on your Kindle if you have a Kindle subscription, and it's just over 300 pages, so it really isn't that big of a book. Also, while doing some research on this book for the video and just out of curiosity, I discovered that this book is a part of a series, and it's the Handmaid's Tale series now. It's book number 1 out of 2. I was saying the first one was released back in the 80s, but book number 2, called The Testament, was actually released back back in 2019. So I'm wondering if that second book came from all of the conversation, the dialogue in American culture back in 2019, and maybe even after the release of the Hulu series. Now for some quick context, when researching why The Handmaid's Tale is commonly banned or challenged in America, here are some of the topics that come up as to reasonings why. And usually the ban or the challenge is in context of public libraries or schools due to sexual content and references to sexual violence, profanity and mature themes, discussion of religion and politics, and depictions of oppression and reproductive control. One thing I didn't mention also is that this book falls under a genre that is out of my comfort zone, and that is dystopian literature. I also saw it listed as speculative fiction, which essentially means that the book explores what if scenarios based off of historical events, so things that have actually happened, but turn them into what if scenarios. So if you've never seen the TV show, you've never read the book, or know anything about what The Handmaid's Tale is, you might have actually heard a reference to this story. We are based in the near future in America, and instead of being America, we are in a society called the Gilead, or the Republic of Gilead. We are following our main character Offred, or Ofred, who is a handmaid. A handmaid is essentially assigned to these elite or higher members of society's homes as essentially a servant to those people. This is what you would call a totalitarian society, and essentially this society is facing reproductive decline and political upheaval or political turmoil. And to sort of regain the control, they have assigned women the role of a handmaid, or assigned women to the role of being a handmaid. And the women that are assigned to be a handmaid are essentially stripped from the lives that they've known. They are taken from their real families, their homes, their lives, and taken into this society known as Gilead and used to be a reproductive cog for these families. And so we follow Ofred or Offred every day, and we get to see how this society runs off the backs of women. So you have these husbands and wives who are essentially in control of the handmaids, and then a step above that, you sort of have this government that are employing these guardians to keep all of these women in order and these families in order. And then we have this overarching eye, which probably sounds familiar, where it's essentially that you're always being watched in this society. Let's keep reading. It is a few days later. I honestly can't even remember the day that I started this video. It's now, what is today? Thursday, and I'm on my lunch break from work. I did in fact finish The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood last night, and boy oh boy do I have some thoughts on this. My first thought is, I wonder how I would have felt about this book and this story and the premise of banning this book and this story if I had never had the context of watching the TV show, at least the first season or two before reading this. I thought I knew what to expect, and I thought I knew most of what could have happened, but still knowing that, I just wonder if I didn't have that perception or point of view, how I would have felt about the story. I will say that for the most part, this story in the beginning, I'd say the first 30%, it felt like, yes, I had watched all of this somehow, some way, and I can envision where this is headed. And then towards the end, I thought, okay, maybe this is a little bit different than the TV series. And then by the time I finished the book last night, which was a lot shorter than I thought, my Kindle did that thing where it said I had 30 more minutes left of reading, but really that was just the ending of the book. Towards the end, there's about 20 minutes of historical notes on The Handmaid's Tale, so you can go through and see where the author might have pulled from in that speculative fiction we talked about. Whatever Kindle pages mean, the book was only 292 pages, so honestly one of the shorter ones that I've read recently. All that being said, I know that the Hulu series was more than one season, and the way this ended, I know for fact that the Hulu series goes on to do more than that. So I wonder if the rest of the Hulu series was just made up by the director and the producer, or if there's some basis in the second book that this author put out years and years later, which I believe, based on the timeline, came out while the Hulu series was also coming out. I have got some researching to do. It really makes me wonder if I should go and watch the series and also read now the second book. Whew. One thing about this book is that the author, at first I was like, there's no quotes. The author is not using any quotes. When the character is talking about dialogue that she has with other people, she always said, she said, he said, no quotations, and it sometimes was confusing. We'd also jump back to her previous timeline before being a Handmaid's Tale through these memories, these flashbacks of her in her own head, and those didn't have quotes. And then about 50% of the way through, I thought, wait a second, there's a quotation right there. But it wasn't consistent, and I really couldn't figure out the formatting on that, but it does feel very intentional in the message and in the way the author was writing the character's thoughts. I don't think I've read, maybe I have but not paid attention, any other book like that where there's no quotation marks. I could be silly, but I do think that's often what people say is in Normal People by Sally Rooney. I think that's a comment on that author's writing style. So are there other authors out there doing this often? I am going to rate this a 4-star. I enjoyed my time. I'm really glad I read it. It was, quite frankly, a hard read and honestly scary for the time that we are in America. I did feel like I left a little bit unsatisfied with the ending. However, I think that if you go on to watch the TV show, maybe you go on to read the second book, that unsatisfaction you get from the ending may end up being resolved. I don't know. There were such powerful quotes in this book. I don't remember wanting to highlight in my Kindle as often as I did in this story. And also when you're reading on Kindle, you get to see all the highlights that other people had, and there were thousands of them. What I get from reading this book is that it made me uncomfortable and it was a hard read, and I hope / would imagine that you would feel uncomfortable reading this book, and that probably falls into the nature of it being a banned or challenged book. At least I hope you would feel uncomfortable reading this book. It feels like the intention that the author had. Really, with this book, it's categorized as dystopian, speculative, but to me it feels like a horror story. It should be in the horror genre at least. I think that there are some real day comparisons. This book addresses questions in American society back in the 80s, and you know what they say, history is always repeating itself. Somehow this book is still addressing questions that we would have in American society today. And now we are gonna get started on our second banned or challenged book in America, and that is The Perks of Being a Wallflower. It is now Friday, and I think I last updated you yesterday or Wednesday. I'm just so glad it's Friday. I am so excited for the weekend. I have started The Perks of Being a Wallflower, and this is by Stephen Chbosky. I could totally be mispronouncing that last name. It could also be Stefan. I could be mispronouncing everything. I will say I've made so much progress in this book within the last 24 hours of reading it. I've read 142 pages, which is 63% of the way through The Perks of Being a Wallflower. I was looking up on my Kindle and it says it's only 237 pages, so really that's not a ton. Honestly, it's one of the shortest books I've read in a long time. I'm trying to wonder if it wasn't on Kindle how much or how thick it would be. I'm usually reading books between 300 and 450 pages. So this week we've had a little bit of a treat on shorter books. Now I am referencing my phone because, again, did some research researched and wrote some things down about this book. It falls in the young adult category, sort of like a coming of age fiction story. I have gone on record of saying young adult is not my favorite. However, that's typically for a young adult fantasy, young adult romance. I think with young adult fiction and coming of age stories, it really is a piece of my comfort zone when it comes to reading fiction and character driven stories. I tend to enjoy books like that. This book was first published in 1999. It is 2026, so this book is 27 years old, a very old book in the grand scheme of books that I'm putting on my TBR for both books I've read this week. And maybe that has something to do with the nature of these books being banned or challenged and how long they've been out. And it is on Kindle Unlimited, so both books this week also on Kindle Unlimited. Now, this book was also a major motion picture, or the other one was a TV series, but a movie nonetheless. It came out in 2012. I myself have not watched the movie, but I do know two of the big characters are Logan Lerman and Emma Watson, so some pretty big names, and it came out, what, 14 years ago? I don't know how I've managed to never have watched it. After this week, it's certainly something on my radar. And now I did a little bit of research on why a book like this was banned, and often it's because of certain topics that the book talks about, and those topics in this book in particular are discussions around mental health, discussions around substance use and abuse, sexual content, LGBTQ themes, and references to abuse and trauma. Those are some of the reasons cited as to the challenge in the ban behind the book. And 62 or however much percent, 63% of the way into this book, I can tell that I have read about some of those topics, and I can understand some of those topics being hard for a reader, especially maybe a reader of a young age. And that goes for the same thing with The Handmaid's Tale. For both of these books so far, some of these are hard topics. While I may not be behind the ban or the challenge of not exposing people to topics and conversations and questions that these books are addressing, more so saying that I can understand that books in general have an age range for the types of conversations being had in the books. Not you should censor this conversation versus this one, more so as this book should be for people this age and older. Now let's talk about what this book is even about, because I had no clue. This book actually follows Charlie, and Charlie is writing letters. We don't know who Charlie is writing letters to. All it says is dear friend, and then it tells you the date and the month and the year that Charlie is writing the letter. And for the most part, these letters are not that far apart, so some are days apart, some are weeks apart, but usually not like jumping years apart. And because of that, we're following Charlie from middle school to high school. It really is a coming of age for Charlie. We are learning all of his inner thought, going on first dates, school dances, going to football games. What you can imagine a teenager, young teenager, going into an older teenager is thinking and doing, we're hearing it through Charlie's letters. And with that, I have no idea where the last 35% or 37% of this is going, because we're just growing up with Charlie. Because I have the picture of what I imagine the movie is, because I've seen the two characters on the cover, Logan Lerman and Emma Watson, I'm curious as to who Emma Watson plays in the movie, because we've met a female character in the story, but I don't know if it's her or who he's writing to. I don't know anything. I want to know who he's writing to, and I want to know how Charlie's story ends. So we're just gonna keep reading and see where this goes. I am a little bit worried that it's going down a bad route and a hard route. Let's finish this book. We made it to Saturday, and yesterday afternoon or evening I finished up The Perks of Being a Wallflower, and really all I have to say is just, oh, Charlie. I just want to give Charlie a big old squeeze. Really, throughout this coming of age story, Charlie is just so young, and I imagine myself in Charlie's shoes at that age between middle school and early high school, and just the things and the feelings and the anxieties and all the emotions that Charlie goes through and experiences. It's just such a hard time in life, especially at that age. I will be honest, by the end of it, I still don't really know who Charlie was writing to, and I wonder if that's the whole point, and it became one of those stories that it felt so hard for me to give a rating to. I was leaning towards a 3-star, and for me a 3-star usually means that I'm glad I read the book, because of course picking up any book you're gonna grow yourself reading, especially a book like this that's banned or challenged. But a 3-star means maybe I didn't love it. It might not stay with me forever, or I might not come back to it or recommend it to someone depending on their preferences. This is one of those books where I feel like most people have already read or read a few years ago, and I'm just now getting to it in my mid-20s. So I wonder how this book felt with people when they first read it a few years back, when the movie came out, things like that. But then the very ending, I don't know, I appreciated it. It brought me to tears in the last chapter, the epilogue. And so I'm feeling like it's a 3.5 rating. I went on Goodreads to rate it, and someone that I follow, a friend of mine, rated this book 12 years ago. So it really goes to show that I'm a little behind the game, but it's never too late to pick up a book. And then when I went to rate it, I realized that it had 2 million ratings. I wonder if that was pre-movie, post-movie, a little bit of both. Either way, so many people have read and rated that book. And then I want to go to some quotes that I highlighted from the book. I think that the premise of Charlie being a wallflower, that we all could probably find a little bit of wallflower in ourselves. And there were really some powerful quotes that I do think would stick with me. And it's just so easy on Kindle to go find your highlighted quotes on your phone. This one especially: millions of people who struggle with and overcome all sorts of problems. You'd be shocked to know how many people understand exactly what you're going through. That doesn't mean that what you are going through is somehow less meaningful, special, unique. On the contrary, it means that what you are going through is more. It is important. It deserves to be seen, spoken of, and understood. I feel like that's one thing that I'm gonna take with me in this book, as Charlie really just learned to try to be where his feet were, especially in a time like his, going through middle school, friendships, relationships, anxieties, mental health. I'm actually really glad I decided to read these banned books, and I think that this is something I would approach again. It's a really unique way to challenge yourself and stay curious. If you've read a banned book, let me know what kind of banned book you've read. What's another banned book that I should pick up? And do you have any banned books on your TBR? You'd be surprised, you might actually have one on there that you don't even know has been challenged. And I really would love to read a little bit more, but these banned books this week were a bit daunting and a bit intimidating. So I'm gonna need a little bit of whimsy in my life for reading the next few weeks, or at least the next week. Probably something hockey, romance, something light and cozy. That's all. Bye for now.